Well, if you are a parent, then you likely have had a call, perhaps at some point from the school saying something's going on at school, please come and collect your child. However, what if you got a call from the school and they said, we want your child only to come for a part day? I'm Marcy Markusa. This is something we're digging in today on our podcast. This is Manitoba. For some parents, the term partial day is all too familiar. Inclusion Canada surveyed parents of children who live with learning disabilities who they say feel like they're being, quote, pushed out from school. They surveyed 164 parents from Manitoba, Alberta, BC, and Ontario about the reasons that their kids were only at school for part of the day. Now, though this is obviously a small sample size, Inclusion Canada is concerned about what they discovered. They've actually since held conversations about their data and also about the impact that this is having on kids and on families. Krista Carr is CEO of Inclusion Canada, and here's our conversation about their survey. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So first and foremost, what made you want to go about, looking into this and creating a report of this kind?
Because we were hearing from parents across the country, not just in the provinces mentioned. Those happened to be parents that filled out the survey, but we were hearing right across the country that this was becoming a growing issue. And I think that's underscored now. You see that the Child and Youth Advocate in New Brunswick has come out with a report on this, and the Ombudsman in BC has just launched an investigation into this practice. So our provincial territorial member associations, of which we have 13, one in every province and territory, we're also raising this as a big red flag in terms of a growing trend.
And when we use the term pushed out from school and you talk about this as a growing trend, what exactly are we talking about?
We're talking about kids that have an intellectual or developmental disability or other type of disability. It usually starts by a parent getting phoned to come and pick their child up for some reason. This isn't always how it happens, but it's very often how it happens. And then that gradually, they're chronically being phoned at different points in the day to come and get their child from school. And that typically will then lead to the requirement of the school to only send your child to school for X number of hours a day, or only certain days of the week, or only certain times of the day, et cetera, very often to accommodate what the school needs or can provide, and not for the educational needs of the student.
So there's actually, one of the findings in the report is that there's this gets formalized somewhat. It's not like you get called about something that happened within school one day. There's an ask at some point that the students actually don't attend full time.
It's often not an ask. It often isn't framed as an ask. It's often your child can now only come to school between 9 and 10 o'clock in the morning, or whatever the schedule might look like.
What's the impact on parents and on students in these situations from what you found from families you talked to and what you found in your report?
Huge impact. I think that's the really poignant piece of the whole story, is the impact on families and the students themselves. Families, reported the mental health issues, the stress on the family, anxiety, depression, all kinds of things like that, loss of their job. Oftentimes when they were chronically having to leave work to go pick their son or daughter up at school, the inability to find childcare. So when your child is supposed to be in school, you typically don't have childcare arranged for your son or daughter. So emotional distress, very unclear, feeling very powerless. That the system has all the power. There's no real appeal process, not knowing where to go or how to get decisions like this reviewed or changed. And from the student's perspective, just horrible impacts around feeling unwanted, feeling like they're bad. They're a bad child. I'm a bad boy. You'll see some quotes in the report around things like that. Feeling that they don't belong at school, feeling like they're not wanted, not to mention the educational gaps in learning and in formal learning and in growth that kids get from school in general, from all the, the friendships, the relationships, the social activities, the recreational activities. I mean, there's a lot of learning and growth that happens in those spaces as well.
Can you tell me a little bit more about, the concern that behavioral issues are one of the biggest reasons that kids are being told, I understand, that they can only be at school for part of the day, and what an expectation should be for proper support within the system? Like, what did you hear from families about, about how they're feeling about that?
Yeah. So I think behavior is definitely one of the big drivers of partial days. I will say, though, that it's not the only one. So oftentimes people think it's the only driver. We did a webinar the other day. We had a family, 12-year-old with Down syndrome, medically fragile, needs the people who work directly with her to wear a mask. And that can't be accommodated. So she only goes to school 1 hour a day. And that's been a 2-year ongoing battle. Behavior, though, tends to drive it. And I think the biggest issue around that is all behavior is communication. And particularly in students who struggle to communicate with words, who don't have words, they don't have many words at times. Sometimes they have no words to communicate. Or they struggle with emotional regulation, the way to articulate what is causing them distress or what they're feeling. And so all those pieces come out in quote unquote behavior. And it's the biggest challenge around it is that often what happens is we want to punish the behavior, whatever that exhibits itself to look like, and the child gets removed from the situation. We often don't back up and say, okay, what's going on here? What's driving this? What's causing this? What are the triggers? When does it happen? How can we mitigate the circumstances? How do we provide better support? And very often classroom teachers and schools don't get that support. They don't have access to the support. But very often families are told, well, we don't have the resources. We don't have the resources. Yet no one's ever really talked about what would that look like? What resources would it take? What would be needed to provide the support? And has anybody even asked for that support?
And what's the answer to that? What's to be learned here in terms of ensuring schools are better able to support children with learning disabilities? Surely, I think there may be a lot of people listening right now that are quite surprised that the best we can do in some cases is you can't do a full day of school. And completely excluding a child physically from the environment. So where do we go from here? What do you hope we learn from what you're telling us?
All children have a right to education. Under many conventions, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and the Education Acts across the country. And we are not providing it to all children. And so I guess what we really need to be doing is, first of all, making a commitment that all children will learn together in regular schools and regular classrooms, and that we will do what is needed to provide the supports that are required to make that work. So sometimes that looks like additional human resources, but often it isn't. Sometimes it's access to specialists that can provide support, behavior mentors, psychiatrists, psychologists, assistance for teachers, time for teachers to plan and strategize, and even to do classroom observation, someone to come in and do a classroom observation. The teacher's busy teaching a class. They sometimes need somebody else to be watching to see what's triggering when this stuff happens, what's the lead up to it, and how do we mitigate some of that? So those are just a few of the things that we can put in place, but we have to be committed to all children learning and receiving an education on an equal basis, and we need to be providing what's required to do that.
Anything I haven't asked you about your findings in this report that we haven't talked about?
I think when we talk about impacts, we know the horridly negative impact it has on the educational outcomes and the self-esteem and self-worth of students. I talked about families, but I think on the school community in general, like, our communities are really diverse. They have all kinds of people in them. And when students are excluded, what we're saying to the other students that are there still at the school is that there are two classes of kids. There are some who don't belong, and there are some who do. And that has ramifications for a whole generation of children, adults, and a society down the road. And I think that estimate the impact of that either.
Krista Carr, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Krista Carr is the CEO of Inclusion Canada. By the way, 25 families from Manitoba were included in their survey. And if you have any feedback on this story, we would love to hear from you. Our CBC listener line, where you can leave a message, including a confidential one if you indicate so, is 204-788-3205. I'm Marcy Markusa. You're listening to This is Manitoba, and let's continue hearing about an issue that affects parents. This time, we're talking about violent crime in Winnipeg, which is happening in a lot of our neighborhoods, but especially affecting some North End inner city neighborhoods. From arson and stabbings and shooting, and most recently an attack on an elderly woman, even police have said that gang activity is expected to escalate. There's a lot of families just trying to obviously go about their day-to-day lives amidst all of this. To that attack, CBC News covered the story of an 83-year-old woman, Victoria Como, who was brutally assaulted while she was out buying a jug of milk near her home at Elgin and Ellen Street. We heard from her son, Joseph Forey, who spoke at a news conference that was hosted by the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs.
Coming home from Thompson last night and hearing, that my mother was brutally attacked and seeing her in the hospital, and trying to make her laugh just so that we could get past the trauma, and realizing that I could have lost her. And looking where my mother lives, it's like putting lions next to lambs and trusting the lion not to eat the lamb. That's what we have in that area.
Experiences like that have renewed conversations about safety. Daniel Emerson's my next guest. He's a dad who lives in the area, happens to be a single dad of two, just a few blocks from where this attack actually happened. So he's got a 6 and a 13-year-old, and he's in studio. Hi there.
Hey.
How are you doing in the neighborhood? I mean, we're talking about sort of the environment, the neighborhood, you live there, you love it, and yet there's a lot going on.
Yeah, growing up in the North End, being like a younger boy in the neighborhood, as it was starting to become a little bit more violent, I definitely feel like I adapted and had some of those street smarts and those abilities to navigate some of those, possible dangers or threats. But I truly feel like when we think about like our older generations, such as like what happened on Elgin there, we're looking at like a different point of view of safety where like people aren't thinking about some of those things and those dangers and how to approach them. I'm more concerned about approaching those types of situations when I have my kids. I would feel absolutely safer not having them simply because I would be able to experience something and not have them be impacted by it, right? It's difficult to navigate how to talk about safety when we want to talk about some of the like systemic barriers and issues that are creating those issues in community as well, right? So it's hard to answer that in a good way because we also want to make sure that like we're supporting needs and making space for those that also need to be supported in a good way. And that's not to take away from the assaults and the things that are happening in community either. Like I want to at least say that as well.
But obviously, I mean, and I know you even work in the North End, I think, with youth. So I mean, you have a sense of as you said, the sort of holistic pictures, and then even when it comes specifically to youth, some of the sort of pressures and things and underlying issues that are involved in people's lives. So it's complicated.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, there's also when there is this safety issue going on around you and you have sort of a senior that might have owned their home forevermore in the North End and they just want to head out and, pick up some milk. And you said it's hard for you with the kids. Are you feeling like you have to have an increased sense of vigilance around your daily, just living your life daily right now?
So there's just like I would say there's definitely times where I would say, oh, we might not go out at this time, like when it gets a little bit darker. Definitely a little bit more concerning, and but that's, I mean, unfortunately, that's just navigating daily life right now. Like it's not something that people in other communities aren't experiencing as well.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate that it's continuing to happen more and more and more. And become more current, right?
Has there been an increase? I mean, obviously, we're stitching together some recent things but have you felt sort of a shift and a change right now?
So absolutely, I feel like there's like we see a lot of declines in so many ways, and without without trying to be like overly pessimistic or anything, but I do know that like we have systems that are failing community, and those systems are so detrimental to supporting and how do we meet those needs and how do we create safety? Like I don't have the answer. I don't know. Like I wouldn't be able to provide a solution, but I know that community and community's voice is so meaningful, and encouraging people to create a community forum and saying, hey, like what can we do together? Like when we look at like organizational models like mutual aid, like what can we do as a community to support and to encourage each other to take care of this space, and encouraging constituents from that area, from this area to come together and say, we want to be a part of the solution. Let's talk about this problem and find a way that we can make community feel safe.
What systems are the biggest ones when you say that are failing people, that are sort of that cause you the greatest concern?
As a community member, I feel there's when we look at like even the mental health budget, I feel like it's like around $5 billion right now, but mental health is entirely separate. It's an entirely different portion of it. It's a different budget. There's different dollars coming from a different space. And when we think about like how like our brains are taking care of operating every aspect of our daily needs in living, it's wild to think that we have such a small budget for mental health and such a large budget for medical needs and for health, but they're separate. And I feel I don't entirely understand why.
What do you hear from your neighbors? I mean, and how already? I'm just curious because you said if you didn't have the kids, it would be a different conversation even for you. But you have the kids, so what do you do to try to keep the kids safe? And what do you hear from neighbors about coming together to try to help each other?
I've never like truly experienced anything like negative in the neighborhood myself, but I've heard it. And when I've heard it, it's been when it starts to get dark, and you'll hear things and like wonder like, should I go out? Like is there something I can do? And then I think, I have the kids, I can't leave. Like I can't, and it's like a terrible catch-22 where you want to do something and you want to help and support, and how can you in those moments? But I don't entirely feel like I've experienced too much, and that's simply because I take my daughter to school in the morning. I pick her up, and like I said, I when it starts to get dark, we stay home. Right? So
it's hard too because you want to celebrate your neighborhood, as you said. You don't want to add to like a stigma, but when there's realities there, then do you find that people are viewing your neighborhood in the same ways, or do you have? We've heard from people who have said that now they even have friends that like otherwise would come over and they don't want to come, into certain neighborhoods in Winnipeg anymore, which is just like devastating when you think about it.
I've definitely heard things like in passing, but like I love Winnipeg and I love every aspect of like every part. Everybody's amazing. It's sometimes like I said earlier, some of those systemic barriers and challenges that some of our youth are experiencing as well. If we created more space to meet those needs and try to find a way to support, I feel like we would have a better opportunity to create a safer community as well.
Lots of room for us to grow and to improve. Anything to leave us with this morning, Daniel, that I haven't asked you about when it comes to, I know, as you said, I know it's a big topic and I don't expect you to have all the answers, but what are you thinking about and you'd like to, leave us with this morning?
Happy Friday. I'm very excited and very grateful to be here and to share. I really feel like community is the first step, and hearing what everybody wants. Like I can't speak for anybody. Yeah. But community can share what we want and what they need, and that's what matters. Well,
hopefully this will be the beginning of many conversations. We appreciate having you in.
Thank you very much.
Daniel Emerson is a single dad, a father of two. He lives and works in Winnipeg's inner city. Well, I am Marcy Markusa. This is Manitoba, and we're a daily podcast. So if you have any feedback for us, always want to hear from you. But don't forget, in the meantime, if you have been tuning in, to follow and share.